Well, we've seen so much violence in our society, and it seems to be spilling over in a shocking way into the domestic scene. Marital violence, spousal abuse is on the rise, and Stephanie DeMott is a living example of somebody who was in fear of frequent beatings from her husband, Joe. And Joe was convinced his wife would leave him for another man, and of course he drove her to do just that. Well, could there be any hope for a marriage so wounded? Well, let's take a look.
There were days when Stephanie DeMott wouldn't leave the house without her makeup on. It wasn't that she was vain. Stephanie had a secret to cover up. Her husband, Joe, was beating her.
It was almost like that he could even kill me, that he was so angry. And each time, I think over the years, it just got worse. The look, of that he could just... I don't know how to even explain it. It was such an awful look. It was just like, I guess the control, like he was more powerful, and I guess the fear of dying, would come into my mind, like, is he gonna kill me this time?
Joe DeMott was a homicide detective. It was his job to command authority and establish control. At the end of a stress-filled day, it was difficult for him to leave these objectives at the office.
Afterwards, there was always, the feeling of how wrong it was and how you felt, remorseful that you had struck your wife or made her feel bad or had actually injured her. I mean, there was always that feeling of remorse, but the next time a situation would come up, you'd be right back in the same thing.
Stephanie was a Christian, and although her walk with the Lord had suffered under Joe's influence, she still prayed daily.
I would just cry out to God to help me, and sometimes I would just pray to get out of it. Like, I made a mistake, Lord, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to stay here, or, what am I supposed to do?
Stephanie felt trapped. By now, the DeMotts had children, and although their outward appearance was one of a happy family, Stephanie's eyes told a different story.
It was really tearing me apart, and it got to the point where I just didn't think anything of myself. And then when he would, hit me or say, he would say, well, you're worthless, or you're not worth anything, and, you have to stay here. I believed what he said.
Meanwhile, the violence escalated. Joe falsely accused Stephanie of having affairs, and in a jealous rage, he would grab a tool of his trade, a gun.
I'd be afraid even for the kids, because I think, well, he might kill everyone, and I would just say, okay, everything's all right, I'm not going to leave. I really thought that he was crazy and that he was just going to kill us all.
Stephanie lived in fear of hearing Joe's car come in the driveway. Tired of this terror-filled existence, Stephanie made a decision. She deliberately set out to have an affair.
In a way, it was like getting back to it, Joe. It's like, you accused me of this, well, I'll be what you say I am. And the relationship started and went on for 2 years, but then even in that, there were other relationships. It was just like I just went totally downhill, and from that even into drugs and alcohol.
Now it was Joe's turn to look to God. In spite of the life Stephanie was now living, he realized what he loved about her was the love of Christ in her.
Through not wanting to lose my family, I did look up, and I got saved, and I really got saved this time. It wasn't, maybe one of my manipulative acts in the past. It was a situation where I really had a personal relationship with Christ.
Stephanie was unimpressed.
I didn't think he was worth being saved. I mean, that was my attitude. It was like, God, how can you even, save him? There was just so much bitterness and hatred inside of me. I resented even his walk with the Lord, because it was like I felt that he had stolen mine. I blamed him for where I was at.
The DeMotts were separated for 2 years. In this time, Joe prayed for Stephanie while she was living with another man. Stephanie was convinced that his religious conversion was just another ploy to get her back. She began to see, though, that there was a change in Joe, and perhaps his commitment to Christ this time was genuine. Just 2 weeks before the divorce was final, Stephanie came home.
And I could feel Joe's prayers, because I was in conviction of my sin. And even though I didn't love him, I came home.
the DeMott's began intensive Christian marriage counseling. Joe learned to be the head of his home without physical violence.
The more I'd pray and really ask the Lord to take those feelings of frustration and control and everything away from me, they left.
And Stephanie learned to love her husband once again.
He began to nurture me and keep giving that love. My heart started changing, and I can't say exactly when it happened, but it was a process where it had to be built back into me.
Today, Joe and Stephanie's marriage is happy and solid. Their family is still healing from the years of turmoil, but, says Stephanie, with Joe's abuse a thing of the past, she can look to the future without fear.
Now I can say that I love him more than I did when we first got married. And I saw that through Christ that he could learn how to really care for a wife, and how to really give me the things that I always wanted, and desired to have in a marriage.